beautiful people. Welcome to Symphony. Thank you for tuning into my channel. My name is Z. I hope the information you find here helps you in your healing journey if you're on one. If you're not on one, that's okay too. So today I'll go over shame. Shame during trauma is very common. Now, it's really when bad things happen, people often blame themselves. They blame themselves that it's their fault, that the situation, it's probably they created it, or they couldn't really do too much about it, so therefore they were probably bad. That's the reason why the situation happened to begin with. Now, unlike guilt, shame is actually a feeling that we feel in our core. It's more like feeling that our core is bad. So we blame ourselves. A core feeling is really to see ourselves as bad. And most of the time, really, shame develops during childhood, because especially when parents often tell a child, you're a bad boy, you're a bad girl. And when they do something that can be easily corrected, the parent or the caregiver jumps and tells the child, you're just a bad boy, you're just a bad kid. Instead of seeing it as it's the action that's bad, by saying that to the child associates that as a core belief, as a core feeling that the child actually is bad within. Is the badness or the rottenness is within, is at the core. So the child kind of associate that with a belief of them being bad, an inner feeling of being bad. It's not more like the action that they're doing that's bad. It's more like they are bad naturally, or they just bad overall. So that's why it's very important for us not to tell our children, you're a bad girl, you're a bad boy, because they have done something that can be easily corrected or easily directed in another direction, right? We can give them the directions and teach them not to do the same actions again, by just explaining it to them what the proper way is to actually do it, right? Instead of just telling them that they are bad. So when they grow up with that feeling, again, it's a core feeling. Shame is a core feeling, while guilt is an action feeling, right? It comes with actions. So guilt is mostly, I'll go over guilt in another video, but guilt is when we do something and we feel really bad that we have done it, right? So that's guilt. But instead, shame is the other way around. It's more like when we did something, we see that we did it because actually we're a bad person. That's why we did it. It's not that we did a bad action. We see it more like we are a bad person. That's why we did it. That's what shame is, right? So we have to be mindful that internalizing, mostly it's an internalized feeling. And there is a toxicity to it, because when we are so shameful of ourselves, right, and our environment and who we are at a core, we tend to do so many different things to eclipse that, to try to hide that shame, to try to hide the reasons we feel shameful about ourselves. And that's what actually that's what associated with the toxicity. And it's not really, I would say that it's more like a feeling of feeling permanently broken or permanently unlovable. So people who have a core feeling of shame, is very hard for us to try to pour love into them and for them to receive it. It's not hard probably for us to do the action of pouring it into them, but it's more like them receiving the love from us. That's the hardest part, right? Or them seeing it maybe as, and they tend to reject it easily because they see it more like maybe there is something associated to it. There is often, sometimes when you see people, they will say, what's the catch, right? What's the catch? You being too nice to me, what's the catch, right? So if you look deeply into it, there are all the woundings that are associated to that. But some of the wounding really associated to that is mostly feeling unlovable. Deep down, they don't feel that they're lovable. They don't deserve love. And the feeling of not being lovable is often associated with shame. It is often associated with inadequacy. And when we look into narcissism, we can actually see that that's one of the characteristics of narcissistic the core beliefs or the core characteristics of narcissism. That's what it is. There is this deep rooted shame of inadequacy that has to be hidden, and in order for that to be hidden, there is all these different layers of fake, or I would say fake, or I would say really fake personality that is created by the narcissist. That's where the illusion comes from. There's an illusion. There is this mirage trying to show the outside world that this is what they are when they're not really that. And deep down, there is this shame. And I would say that the biggest goal of a narcissist is to hide that shame, that inadequacy as much as possible. That's one of their deepest core, is not to show it. To not show it to the public, to not show it to their friends, to their family, to coworkers, and whoever else. So we have to be mindful that there are so many different things that are associated with shame. Even though culturally, sometimes there are so many things also that we can see as taboo. And the taboo is most of the time things that are actually culturally, or it's a cultural belief, it's a communal belief. It's not necessarily a one person belief, but it's an understanding within a community, within a certain number of people, that this thing is not good. This thing is not good for us to practice. It's not good for us to do. Therefore, when you do it, right, there is this shame that can surface, feeling that, oh, I violated something that I shouldn't have violated. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's not just the action again. It's more like I must be bad compared to everybody else if I'm doing it and nobody else is doing it, because it's not allowed to be done that way, right? But I'm doing it, so therefore I must be bad. Therefore, my core should be rotten. My core must be rotten, right? My core must be rotten. My core must be bad. That's the reason I'm doing it. If I am doing it and everybody understands that, it's not something that we should do, right? And I have this desire, and sometimes it's really associated a lot in many different cultures, or I would say religions, cultures. The taboos are mostly things that not many actually see it as okay, but they are still being practiced behind closed door, right? People still practice them behind closed door. And there's always this shame of, oh, why am I doing this? If everybody finds out that I'm doing this, I might be excommunicated. I might not be accepted. I might be rejected by this community, these people, my family, my religious group, or my cultural group, or whatever else, right? And sometimes it's not even necessarily the group that we associated with. It's because we were raised that way to not do it. Even if we're by ourselves, just doing it alone can trigger this feeling of shame from the violation of that specific culture by practicing that taboo that we have been taught not to actually cross those boundaries, not to do that specific action. So we can actually feel shame for doing it. But sometimes, actually, when it comes to taboo, it can be both. It can be sometimes guilt of doing it. Sometimes it can be the shame of doing it. It all depends on, again, what is that specific taboo. It's not really all taboos that we feel shame about. It's again, like I would say specifically something as incest, for example, right? That's something that not only biologically, it's not something that we should do, because of so many studies that have shown that mixing genes that are so close to each other can actually create abnormalities, right? Not only that, even if we put the science part of it aside, right? We know that in many religions, in many cultures, right? It's not something that is allowed for different reasons, for many different reasons, right? That is not biological at all, for many different reasons. And also, because of that, if that is practiced, right, in certain cultures or in certain groups or in certain religions, even if it's practiced, it will be something that is very hidden. It's very it's very hidden, and it's not really something that is spoken about. Even though people do it, they do not really talk about it. They will go to the end of the world to protect that from coming out because, again, of the shame that comes with it. The shame because it's a core belief that we should not do that, right? It's not only the action that is associated with it, but it's also a core belief because in many different cultures and religions, it's a violation of certain boundaries, certain deep-rooted boundaries within a communal space, within a family space, within it's just a boundary that is understood in many different cultures, in many different religions, that we should not cross that boundary. But again, when people practice it, people do practice it, unfortunately, right? And by practicing it, there are so many moral violations also that come with that. And those moral violations have, unfortunately, certain, I would say, certain psychiatric disorders that can also spawn from it. So we have so many different taboos out there. I would just give this one example and then I will not go too deep into it because this is one of the big ones that, unfortunately, until today, it is practiced. People practice it, but people do not really, in certain families or in certain cultures, it is practiced. People don't talk about it. People don't really say much about it, but it does not mean that it's not existent. It's still existent, unfortunately. And children who come from those environments, they suffer many different, psychiatric disorders, psychological disorders too, from being put through such a action, right? Such action, such shame, because the shame really is the feeling that comes after the fact, after they have went through it, unfortunately. Is not only they feel shame, they feel really shame that they must be bad. The reason why that happened to them, they must be bad. The guilt is mostly probably the person who inflicted that action, right? That trauma to those older people, to the abusee. They might feel some guilt eventually, or maybe not, right? Because sometimes the guilt might be there, but it might not necessarily mean that they will stop doing it. So that we have to be mindful of that. Sometimes people who inflict abuse might have guilt associated with their action, but that does not necessarily mean that they will stop those actions. They will still keep doing it, unfortunately, until something stops it or someone stops it. Stop them in their track. But unfortunately, they will keep those actions going for years and years sometimes until something happens that actually brings it out. And then the abusees might get their justice from there. But again, when it comes to certain cultural practices, even though those specific actions might not be normal, might not be good, at the end of the day, that does not stop the people who are doing it it does not stop them. And because of that, there is a tendency of also for older people to protect them from, because there's the protection is mostly linked to the fact that it will make them guilty by association. So if this person is doing it, I'm their cousin, I'm their mother, I'm their uncle, or I'm the pastor, right? And I'm so close to them and they're doing it. If they get caught, I might also be looked at a certain way because people might think that I knew about it the entire time and I didn't do nothing about it. I did not protect that person who has been going through that. So we have to be mindful that sometimes it's not just the person who's inflicting the abuse. Sometimes it's their environment that also facilitate the abuse. They facilitate the abuse because, again, when we have the tendency of feeling shameful for certain things, feeling that deep down we are not good, we're more likely to act and do so many different actions to protect ourselves from those inadequacies from coming out, from the exterior, from exposing those inadequacies, from the external part of us, which is in general the community outside of us, the friends, the family, the neighbors, from them seeing those inadequacies. So therefore we go to the extreme. We can go to the extreme to hide those inadequacies or to hide those things we feel like we are inadequate about or we feel shameful in our core about. So we can go to the extreme to do things that we have no business doing to stop that. Okay, so we have to be mindful that not always inadequacies are something that we see that can they're not necessarily bad, but again, it's how much are we willing to do, how far are we willing to go to actually hide those inadequacies, to actually hide the fact that we feel shame at our core. So we have to be mindful that it's not always that we all inadequate up to a certain extent, but again, it's how far are we willing to go to hide those inadequacies. That's what actually we need to be mindful of. Now, some of the things that we have to think about is that what are the links between shame and trauma? Shame can exist naturally. It's not always that we actually, it can exist slightly within us. It's not always that we have to see it as a bad thing. Shame can exist naturally because, like I just said, we all have a slight inadequacy within us. And sometimes we can feel that those inadequacies are parts of us that we don't want, we don't like, we don't want it to come out. So therefore, that shame can slightly be associated with that, to feel like, oh, I don't feel that I'm good in this thing. I'm bad at this, I'm bad at that, right? But again, it's when we go so far to a certain extent to try to hide it, that's what actually is bad. When we internalize it and we do our very best to hide it, because it's a sense of helplessness after the trauma, especially after trauma. This type of shame we feel when we did not go through trauma and the type of shame we feel when we went through trauma are slightly different, because the shame we feel when we go through trauma, it's mostly associated with helplessness, that I am bad, that's the reason this specific event happened to me. So we have to be mindful of that. That's the external event happens to us because we were a bad person. It's not that we see it as it's not our fault. It's the person who acted upon and those actions and inflicted that pain to us. They're the bad person. No, we see it. It's mostly like we kind of flip the roles. No, they didn't. They did it to us, but we're the bad person. That's the reason it happened to us. So we have to be mindful. And then the silence and secrecy is definitely something that shame thrives upon, especially when it's hidden. And that's like I just mentioned earlier, sometimes the society is what pushes that secrecy and that silence for certain inadequacies to be hidden, especially when it's practiced within society, within the community. And that shame, that silence and secrecy is what amplifies it. So therefore shame thrives in that, because the trauma will keep perpetuating. It will keep repeating over and over and over and over because of that person who is actually inflicted that pain is being protected, is being hidden, is being, I would say, the person who is receiving the trauma is being sometimes even silenced. Sometimes even silence. That's where the silence is coming from. Sometimes that person is even told, you better not go tell no one that this happened to you. You better not go tell no one. So that person ends up feeling not protected. And sometimes that can come also as, no one is protecting me because I'm bad. If I was a good person, then people would come to my help. People will come to me and protect me against this person who is actually inflicting this abuse or this pain to me, right? So we have to be mindful that it's not necessarily, we talk a lot sometimes about certain words, and we talk so much, we talk about certain feelings and certain inadequacies without necessarily putting them in context. But when we put them in context, we understand so much better how to differentiate certain things, and not only to differentiate, but to be able to see where it comes from. Because the root of it, the origin of it, is what sometimes is so important for us to heal. If we don't know where the origin is coming from, it's hard for us to be able to heal it. It's almost like when we have weeds right in the backyard. If we do not really know where to find the roots, we cannot just keep plucking the top, because the roots are still there. It will keep growing. That weed or those weeds will keep growing if we just cut the top. We have to find the roots, the origin, where it's coming from, to be able to understand where it's coming from and how to address it. Because again, shame as just regular shame, or I feel shame from insecurity, because sometimes shame actually we can have shame from certain insecurities. But again, shame from trauma is different, especially when it comes to physical abuse. When it comes to physical abuse in childhood, it comes to physical abuse in childhood, when it comes to certain body parts being touched in childhood, those kind of trauma can amplify the shame, the core belief that the child is bad. That's the reason that the child was violated to begin with. Now, it can also stop people, because of that silence and secrecy, that can stop people from going to seek help, because that's actually when women are violated in a certain way, right? When women are violated, physically violated, there are so many women who are physically violated who do not only women, men too, not only women, especially men, when they're violated, because the society have this role of putting them in a certain category of strength. Oh, men have to be strong, right? It's very hard for men to go seek help when they're violated, because of the fear of being seen as weak. They do not go seek help, especially when it comes to physical abuse from their female partners. They do not go seek help because it's more like, what? That little lady beat you up, right? So it's more like, it's, instead of seeing it as, yeah, it's very possible that that little lady is violent. That little lady did certain things. That little lady got a knife. That little lady did so many different things to violate this man or this male, right? But again, it's so much harder for men to go seek help because of that. And for women, I would say they are also, they also fall within the same categories for sure, that, but it's not for the same reasons. They fall within the same category of not going to seek help because it's more like, no one will believe me even if I tell them that this happened. No one will believe me, especially when it comes to marital abuse, certain abuse, physical abuse, certain intimate physical abuse, right? When it comes to the intimate physical abuse, when you go and tell, when people go and tell certain people, certain authorities especially, that are supposed to provide the support to the abusee, sometimes there is this underlined dialogue. There's this underlined stare. There's this underlined conversation that we can kind of see between sometimes staff, but we cannot really pinpoint. It's more like, oh, what? The husband did that? How can the husband do that, right? They married, so I mean, you know, how can he do that to her? The R word, I should not say the whole thing because YouTube might just censor it. So the R word, more like, okay, I don't think, you know, that's not, you know, what they married. I mean, you know, I've seen that. I have actually seen it in the healthcare system for sure, that sometimes it happens that, hey, just because you married, therefore it should not be something that we believe that it's feasible. That a lady might come and say, hey, I was physically abused in an intimate way by my spouse. And they would be like, nah. You know, there's always this underlying tone of the story not being so truthful. So therefore it makes victims, or I would say abusees, reluctant to even come to seek help and bring their trauma or bring what happened to them to those authorities, and to be documented and to seek help. They just don't do it. They don't seek the help. They don't seek the support because they might not even be believed. Because their stories might be very much put under the rug and swept under the rug and be forgotten. And even if they get justice for what happened to them, sometimes it's not necessarily proportional to what happened to them. It's almost like a slap on a hand kind of justice. It's not necessarily the kind of justice that will prevent other people from repeating the same exact thing, right? So we have to be mindful of that. And also to just be mindful that sometimes it's a whole community thing. It's not just an individual thing. Sometimes it's an entire community thing that it makes people feel like they don't belong because the community is not supportive because of, again, the secrecy and the silence. Sometimes it's an entire community that kind of goes in cahoot and silence that one person who's been through so much. Because if they go and talk, it's more like, oh, they're a whistleblower. They went and they told the story about what happened to them. So therefore the community is seen in a certain way. So that also can make abusees not want to go and bring their story at the front line and seek justice. And most of the time too, that one person is not the only person who's going through it. It's not the first, not the last, not the in between, right? It's many other people went through the same exact thing. But again, the community has sworn secrecy and silence to protect their secrets. And the abuser's secrets. So therefore, no one is trying to seek help or seeking justice for what has been done to them. So we have to be mindful of that. Now, to address it really is self-compassion. The biggest thing is, especially if it's through trauma, if it's shame that came from trauma, is self-compassion, self-acceptance, accepting ourselves, accepting the fact that it happened, that we cannot go back in time and change what happened. We cannot, we might try to seek justice for ourselves, but sometimes we have to make sure that we look at the pros and cons of the situation and see, is it safer to hold on to seeking justice until it's safe to do it? Because sometimes the time is very critical. The time is a great factors or of when to go seek that justice. Now, I'm not saying don't seek help for sure, but seeking justice, going to the authorities, I would say that's the first thing that should be done for sure. But sometimes looking at the pros and cons and seeing, is it safe to do it right there and there? Because the safety of the person matters more than anything, more than seeking the justice. Because there's no point of going seeking justice and we are dead when the justice actually, the verdict comes back, right? As the justice is done. Now, I'm not saying that will for sure prevent other people from doing it. That will prevent also the person who has done it from doing it to other people. However, it's the safety is number one. Making sure that we know when to actually go seek that justice. Of course, by seeking justice, I mean, we have to go to the authorities, of course, to bring what happened to us, to document our abuse, to go ahead and seek support, seek help, right? That's what I mean by that. But sometimes, again, it has to be a strategic move. We cannot just go and when those other people are there, they're waiting for the proper time to probably harm us for not talking, silence us in any means necessary, right? So we have to be mindful that not seeking justice is not worth sometimes our lives, right? Even though, again, at the end of the day, that's what should be done. So we have to be mindful of that. And making sure that we separate ourselves from the people who are doing that to us. Distance is the number one thing, if we can, for sure. And that also has to be a strategic move. We have to have distance between us and people who are abusing us. And not only people who are abusing us, but people who are protecting the abuser. Because if they're protecting the abuser, they're obviously guilty by association. There is no point of being around them. There is absolutely no reason to be around them. Now, feeling guilty of leaving those people behind, sometimes, unfortunately, that can happen to the abusee. The person who has sustained the trauma can feel guilty to leave those people behind by putting that distance between them. Now, the number one thing I will ask myself, if I am for sure the person who has been abused, right, is if the situations were flipped around, will they stick around for you? They would even stick around for you to protect you, to help you, to seek justice for you, to seek anything for you, right? Why would they leave their own self for you? Why would they leave their own, I would say, why would they actually leave their own lives for you? They would not do that. So if the roles were flipped, they would never say, hey, I'm just gonna sit around and not leave you behind, even though I'm the one who's hurting. They would not do that. So we have to be mindful and not to even compare. It's not even this is not even a comparison thing at all. But it's more like to understand that sometimes our trauma is what actually keeps us stuck. Our trauma is what keeps us stuck. And if we understand those patterns of we can get out of it easy enough. And the self-compassion is for sure to be able to understand that, not to self-criticize ourselves, not to criticize ourselves, not to criticize ourselves, not to negative talk to ourselves, not to always tell ourselves it's our fault if it happened to us. It's our fault that we couldn't really do much about it. It's our fault. Otherwise, we're bad. That's the reason why it's happening to us. The criticism is not for us to put ourselves through. It shouldn't. It should definitely not. And those voices in us, we need to be able to find ways to silence them, not to keep hearing them over and over, because that only makes the situation worse. That only makes our situation worse and keeps us stuck. Because if we have those voices in us over and over, keeps telling us all those negative thoughts, circulating negative thoughts, that prevents us from being able to think about a strategic move to actually exit that situation. So we have to be mindful that it's not always other people who have to protect us, right? Against other people. We have to protect ourselves against our own self sometimes, because those voices are in there within us, keeping us stuck in that situation. And unless we silence those voices, we would not be able to hear ourselves in that silence and being able to think strategically how to actually exit that situation. And we have to learn to be kind to ourselves. The practicing self-compassion also includes being kind to ourselves by doing positive affirmations, by telling ourselves that we deserve better, we can do better, we can find better, we can go better places, not to be in that one place, sitting there, having all that pain being inflicted on us. So we have to be mindful. Self-compassion is not just silencing those voices, it's also being kind to ourselves. Being kind to ourselves, right? And then also seeking professional help, making sure that we seek professional help. We talk to someone, and trauma-informed therapists will be the best really to go to talk to, especially depending on the specific trauma that we have sustained, especially if it's about, I would say, intimacy. When it comes to, I would not say, I don't like usually intimacy with trauma, because really they don't really mush, they don't really go together. Because for YouTube's sake, I would not say the specific words, right? Because again, it flags it. So I'll go ahead and just make sure that we understand that if it comes to physical, certain intimate parts, our intimate parts being abused, right? We are being abused by intimate parts specifically, right? We have to make sure that we seek someone who has specific experience within that sector to be able to help us, because that's one of the biggest one. Usually that's one of the biggest one that we find that we feel shame, right? That's one of the biggest one that's associated to shame. Now other ones too, like bodily injury, especially chronic bodily injury. A child, for example, who is beaten for many years, right? And that child specifically been told all the time how bad they are. And not that, oh, your action is bad. No, you are a bad boy, you're a bad girl, and then beaten at the same time, right? On top of that. And those kind of traumas can definitely be associated with shame. Again, because it becomes a core thing. It becomes more like a visualization of self as being bad. An association of self as being bad. So we have to be mindful when we talk to our children, and even what we do too. Corporal punishment, especially when it comes to children. And not only corporal punishment, because corporal punishment, usually children don't see it. They see it automatically as, I must be bad if you have to inflict pain on me to be able to teach me what I'm not supposed to be doing. They don't see it as an action, even though as a parent, or back in the day, nowadays, not many people do it, but back in the days, corporal punishment was mostly associated with, I will go ahead and punish you so you can understand that what you're doing is not a good thing. But for the parent, it's more like, I'm punishing you for the action.
for the child's mentality is more like, my parent is punishing me because I am bad, right? So we have to be mindful the way we approach certain things. Our perspective on certain things is completely different than the way the child perceives it. Our perception is completely different. Again, we're an adult, and sometimes we do things that children see it as complete opposite. They perceive it as a complete opposite of how it comes out. So we have to be mindful. All right, so I'll go ahead and just stop it here, and until I'll say this every time in every video, please, please, please take care of yourself, making sure that you do your daily routine, or doing your walks, your yoga, your meditation, any mindful actions that you have that actually helps. Even if it's a nap, sometimes a nap is mindful. At least for me it is, because it shuts my brain down. It just makes me not think about the stress of life, right? And there are so many other ways not to think about